Hi, my name is Greg. Welcome to Nantucket Cooks. Today we're going to continue to clear out our cupboards. We went deep into our cupboards today and what we found was a bunch of different grains. So today we're going to cook farro, millet, and quinoa. So if you're not familiar with any of those grains, they're all really simple, straightforward, great things to have in your fridge, great things to put on salads, great things to add to soups and stews. So let's get started with what we have. Let's see, we have millet. Quinoa comes in the tricolor variety. And then we also have Italian farro. These are all really easy to cook, and it's all about ratios. So I know that people love to have recipes. These recipes are really simple, and again, they're just gonna be ratios. So when you're thinking about like rice you might be familiar with, rice is always a 2-to-1 ratio. So you have 1 part rice, 2 parts water. Then the quinoa is about the same, 2 parts water to 1 part quinoa, or 1 part quinoa to 2 parts water. And then when we move into millet, millet is a 3-to-1 ratio, and then farro is a 4-to-1 ratio. Any of these grains you could cook like pasta if you don't want to be mindful of the ratios. However, with the ratios, it allows you to cook more efficiently and also allows you to cook things like, you can make them with chicken stock, you can make them with veggie stock, beef stock, whatever you like. As long as you have the ratio, you won't end up wasting anything. It also allows you to cook a pilaf style, where you actually are sauteing onions before you put in the grain, and then the grain goes in, and then the liquid goes in, and that's a complete dish, so you don't have to worry about straining it out. So we're gonna cook all of these today in kind of a pilaf style, meaning that we're gonna use the ratios and have the right amount of water in there, so that when it's done, and no need to strain. We'll start with quinoa, one of the easiest. So quinoa comes in red variety, white variety, black variety. This is the tricolor, so we're gonna get a little bit of all of those colors in there. Most of the time it calls for you to rinse beforehand, so rinsing off the grain just helps to get anything that's loose or any dirt on it. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna prepare the quinoa. Again, the quinoa is a 2-to-1 ratio, so we'll go with about 2 cups of dry quinoa, and then we'll go ahead and mix in that with 4 cups of water, and then we'll let it simmer, and it's gonna be done, perfect and easy, and we'll throw a couple aromatics in there so you can see how that works as well. To get started with the quinoa, the first thing we're gonna do is rinse it. So we'll take 2 cups, measure it out into a strainer, and then just rinse it under some running water for a few seconds. The rinsing might not be essential, but it's gonna give your food in the end just a little bit of a cleaner taste. So we've got 2 cups of rinsed quinoa. We're gonna add to that 4 cups of water, equal to 1 quart of water. And now we're gonna add just a little bit of flavor. Again, if you wanted to, you could do this with chicken stock, homemade, canned, whatever you like. We're gonna use water right out of the tap. Tap stock, sometimes you call it in the kitchen, but water is a really essential part of cooking. And as long as you go ahead and season it, it's still gonna taste great. So a nice healthy pinch of salt. Remember, you can always add more salt later, you can't take it away. A couple of cracks of fresh ground pepper. We're gonna go a couple of bay leaves, 2 bay leaves, and a couple of whole stems of thyme. By putting the whole stems in there, they're easy enough to take out later. We'll turn that on high. We're gonna let it come up to a simmer. We're gonna mix it, put the lid back on, low heat, about 15 minutes, almost exactly the same way as you would make rice. So you can see all we have in there, quinoa, water, aromatics ready to go. If you'd like, you could throw a clove of garlic in there. You could throw a sprig of rosemary, whatever you have sitting around. Things that are kind of easy to take out later or work great for aromatics. You want to do it, you could do cloves and make it more of a sweeter, perfumey thing. You could put any sort of herbs that you like in there, any sort of big cinnamon stick, something like that. We're gonna stick it a real traditional, kind of savory, more French style. So we'll let that come to a boil, and then we'll turn it down, but we'll put it over here on the other burner so we can get started on our next. So now we're gonna get into millet. Millet is a less known grain for most people out there. In fact, one of the most important things that millet is used for is bird seed, done in suet and other things like that. It's not something you usually think about as eating, but it is really, really great. It's a whole grain. We use it a lot in veggie burgers to give things kind of character. And with millet, we're gonna start off toasting it. So to give it a little bit of a toasty flavor, we're actually gonna toast it into a dry, hot pan. We use a small saute pan. We're gonna get it on a nice high heat. We're gonna let that heat up. And we're gonna measure out 2 cups of millet. The millet now is gonna toast. And we're just gonna keep moving it around on a high flame. It's a good time to practice your pan flipping skills. In fact, when we teach kids how to cook and they always wanna know how to flip things in the pan, we'll start out with just a dry pan and some rice or some beans and give them a chance to kind of toss it around. So you're at home trying this out, this is a good time to practice your little pan flipping motions. If you think you're gonna make a mess and throw millet and quinoa all over the place, you can do it and do it with a spoon as well. The idea though is to keep everything moving so that you don't have any chance of burning any of the grains. And this is the same technique that you would use if you were toasting herbs and spices or anything like that. And what we're looking for is to bring out some of the toastiness of the millet. We can touch it to see how hot it's getting, and we can start to smell it a little bit too. We start to get a little bit of a smelly, of a toasted grain, and that's exactly what we're looking for. I touch them to kind of see how hot they're getting, to make sure I'm really in touch with them. If they're burning hot and they burn my fingers, that means I'm probably burning them. So we want to keep them from getting too hot, and that's why we're constantly moving them around. So I'm holding them off of the flame. They will toast, they will start to change color, but as you're watching them, it's going to happen very subtly. So it's something that you might not notice. As I'm toasting the millet here, I notice that my quinoa is starting to boil. So we'll take a little turn of the quinoa there. We'll put it on the lowest setting that our stove has to offer. Put the lid on, and we'll set a timer for about 15 minutes. Nice and hot. I'm gonna go ahead and call them done. Once the millet is toasted, smells great, we're gonna put it into in our pot, and then we're gonna add the 3-to-1 ratio. So we have 2 cups of dry millet in there. Again, we took it out of the hot pan, so we don't have to worry about it overcooking or burning or anything. But now we're just gonna measure out 6 cups of water to go in with our 2 cups of millet. Millet, water, Nothing too fancy. Now we're gonna treat the millet the same way we did the quinoa, which is gonna add a little bit of aromatics to it. Nice healthy pinch of salt. A few cracks of pepper. A couple of bay leaves. And a few sprigs of thyme. We're gonna bring that to a boil, turn it down to a simmer, put a lid on it, and set the timer for about 15 minutes again. Now we have quinoa cooking, we have millet cooking, and I saved my favorite, the best in my opinion, for last, which is farro. Farro is a grain you may have heard of before. It's becoming more and more popular. It's referred to sometimes as an ancient grain, according to tradition and random Wikipedia pages. Farro is the oldest grain. So every grain can trace its lineage back to farro. Farro is, for intents and purposes, a wheat, so it does have it has gluten in it. So if you're a gluten-free person, you want to avoid the farro. However, the millet that we did before does not have gluten. It is occasionally processed in facilities that also handle gluten. So similar to oatmeal, if you are a celiac and you're really trying to avoid gluten, it's important that you check the label. There are gluten-free millets available if it's something you want to try. The quinoa is gluten-free, and I believe almost always gluten-free. I've very rarely seen any quinoa that's processed in a wheat facility. But again, if you're a celiac, you got to check on those things. But in general, quinoa, gluten-free, millet, gluten-free, and then the farro is full of gluten, and it's in all its glory. So let's talk about the farro. So farro, this is the stuff that we get here at the cafe. It is Roland is a great company. It's pearled, similar to the way barley is pearled, which just means it goes through a process of kind of being cleaned and rolled a little bit. So it is slightly processed, still considered a great whole grain. Farro can be like pasta, cooked to a couple different degrees depending on your preference. Al dente, so it still has a little bit of bite to it, a lot of form to it. You can cook it at a really high rolling boil if you're doing the pasta technique, which will make the outside a little bit mushier and the inside a little bit more al dente. Cook at a slower, lower heat. In the pilaf style that we're gonna do it, it should be more consistent throughout. But again, the amount of water that you add to it and the length of time of the cook is what kind of how it tastes in the end. But with farro, with all of these grains, you can take a little taste of it. If it's not to your liking, cook it more, add more water, or make a note of it so the next time you can do it a little bit less. As it says in the label, farro, you're looking for about 4 parts water to 1 part grain. So for the same amount that we've been making here, we did 2 cups of the quinoa, which called for 4 cups of water for a total of 6. We did 6 cups of millet, or 6 cups of liquid into the millet to 2 cups, making 8. So this one we're going to yield with 2 cups. We're going to yield 2 full quarts of cooked quinoa, give or take. So it really does expand quite a bit. But let's make a good amount. That way we'll have some, put it in the fridge. It really makes a great salad topper. It makes a great individual salad. So we'll play with a couple things once we have them all cooked. I'm gonna give you a good look at what the farro looks like. Really little grains of rice almost, but once they cook and plump up, you'll see they're quite a different look. Millet's come up to a boil. We'll take that down. Turn it down, give it one nice stir, make sure nothing's clumped up at the bottom. Put the lid back on. And again, it's gonna be about 20 minutes in that millet. But after the quinoa's done, wait a few minutes, check this, and we're gonna move right down the road. For the farro, we turn the heat on high, and we're gonna do the exact same thing we've done 2 times now. Only difference here being the ratios. We're gonna add a nice pinch of salt. Fresh ground pepper. A couple of bay leaves. And a little bit of fresh thyme. Exactly the same thing. Stir it a little bit, let it come to a boil, stir it again, put a lid on it, let it simmer. This is gonna take probably a little bit longer, maybe about 20 or 25 minutes, but not that much longer. And again, we can kind of look at it as it gets closer. See the timer? We got about 5 minutes left on the quinoa. So we'll give it just a minute. We'll start to bring these things out, and they're gonna have a little bit of a cooling off period in the pan as well, where we kind of fluff it, put the lid back on for about 5 minutes, make sure everything evens out well without overcooking any of the grain at the bottom. So we've got 3 grains going. They're gonna come out soon. We're gonna show you a couple of ideas on what to do with those cooked grains besides put them in the fridge and eat them. But we're gonna make a nice little salad out of a few of them. We can sprinkle them on top of another green salad in order to get in some more whole grains into our diet. And that's about it. So let's hang out here for just a couple minutes and let's see what they look like when they're done. All right, so it's been about 15 minutes in the quinoa, so we're ready to give it a check. So what we're looking for with the quinoa, we can see it's starting to have these little halos. It's hard to see, but there's little like ringlets that become from the quinoa. Use a fork to fluff it out a little bit. You can see down to the bottom, there's no extra water in there. It's all been absorbed, it's all really nice. We'll let it, this is a fluff, so we'll fluff it a little bit, turn it off the heat. We'll put the lid back on, a little bit offset, let some of that steam come out, let it really even out and finish its cooking process, and then it's gonna be just about perfect. While we're here, we take a little peek at the millet, which has been simmering and should be close to getting done. Not so close. All right, so we can see with the millet, we still have a good amount of water boiling off. So it's still gonna take some time before it absorbs in that fully. And then the farro is still on its way to coming to a boil. Now that we've given the quinoa a chance to rest for a little bit in the pan, we're gonna take it out, fluff it out, and see how it looks. It's still very hot. We use a fork to mix it around, just like you would with rice. The idea being that it breaks up the clumps and doesn't mush anything. We're gonna let it cool off for a little bit. But it looks really, really nice. It's really nicely done. Take a little taste of it, make sure that it's done nicely. Really, really nice. Little touch of a crunch left to it. Really nice aromatic, nicely flavored, doesn't need anything. Just to cool down, and then we'll get to use it in our salad. So you can see now, compared to where it was before, had a lot of water floating on top of it. All that water's gone. We'll use our fork, kind of scrape into it. All the way down to the bottom, I see there's just about no water pulled up in there, so it's mostly absorbed. No, I can't see my glasses, but we'll fluff it up a little bit. We'll put the lid back on. Just for a little bit, let it go a little off center, let it cool. And that should be ready in just another about 5 minutes so we can take out that millet. So now we have a chance to check out the millet. It was finished. We turned the heat off, put the lid back on for a few minutes. Now let's see what we got. We got a big loaf of millet. We'll use our fork to fluff it up. It's a nice grain. You can see how it kind of clumps up a little bit. So you can see why we choose to use this to make veggie burgers, things like that. We'll give it a taste, make sure it's delicious. Very nice. Tastes like it needs a little bit more seasoning, so we'll do that now. Add a little bit more salt. more pepper, and we'll toss that right up. All right, we'll let that rest, and then we'll come back to that a little bit later, see if we can make it more delicious. And we should have the farro about ready to go. You see, we still have a little bit of liquid up in that farro, but I'm gonna give that a taste. It's been cooking for a little while, it's probably pretty good. See, there still has a good amount of liquid in there, but we can always strain this off if it seems like it's a little bit already cooked. They're really plump, they're really tasty. And I think they are done. So I'm gonna strain off some of this water, and next time, instead of the 4-to-1 ratio, we'll go a little bit shyer. But we'll strain off some of that water, and we'll let it cool.